All right, welcome to the Meaty part of the curve, 30 minutes of fundamental tech teaching and talk. We're your hosts, Jeremy Bond and
Sandra Brown.
We'll be here weekly, hosting a webisode featuring special guests, surprises, and straight talk about the day's instructional challenges. The views and opinions expressed on the Meaty part of the curve are exclusively the thoughts and opinions of the hosts and or guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Central Michigan University. And I think you're right, Kendra. We've got an ideal segue into the focus today. And it dovetails from last week, too. Last week we talked about communication tools, and there's so many at our disposal, what guides us to use which and when. And out of that came an opportunity to have a special guest with us today. And since the tagline claims that we're going to have guests and surprises all the time, I would say that Amy is both a guest and a fun surprise for everyone that's made it today. Amy Lilienfled is with us today, so hopefully we'll all welcome her warmly. She has extensive online.
Hello, everybody.
Hello,
everybody. Thank you so much, Jeremy and Kendra, for inviting me for this wonderful opportunity, and thank all of you out there for attending today. I look forward to this session.
We're going to have some fun. Amy's a good person to have with us today because she's taught a bunch, mostly in geography. She's taught here at CMU for us. She was on campus from 2002 to 2009, started teaching online in 2008, and has done so pretty consistently and steadily ever since. Has also worked in the University of Wisconsin's colleges system at a couple different locations. Has done online and hybrid course design work. But really one of the reasons, but the key reason we've added her into the agenda today is she's encountered a mismatch that I think lots of us have probably encountered. Essentially a mismatch between her students' perception of the value of what's called chats by a lot of us, but what we're really talking about are virtual class sessions, meetings of some kind. The perceived value of those among her students versus her own perceived value of those kinds of things. And so we have some questions that we've planned. Kendra and I have planned to ask Amy today. And certainly I think she's open to taking questions from any one of you who's with us today. So feel free, as always, microphones are enabled, chat panels enabled. I say always. I've forgotten probably about a third of the time, but not today. Not today. But I think I'll just kick things off because we do have our first questions for Amy planned, and we'll get a nice, beautiful, if not a little random visual up for everybody to look at. So, Amy, my understanding from our conversations is that you value synchronous interaction with your online students, and what I want to know particularly is why you have a preference to make that type of activity a required part of your classes. So why don't you go ahead and share with us?
Well, thanks so much. I guess the bigger context of it, Jeremy, is that I realized I'm just really a synchronous communication person. I don't really know what that means, but I went into teaching because I am what I consider a people person. I love interacting with people, communicating with people. And I realized when I taught on campus, for example, that in the weeks leading up to the beginning of the semester when I had to put my syllabus together and stuff, a lot of times I was just dragging and I wasn't really into it. But then the minute I got into the classroom on the first day, it really energized me, and I remembered why I teach, why I love this profession. And so that's, I think, a very important context, is just who I am as a person and as a teacher. The second point is that this particular class, GO 105, is a science class with a lab. And I know most people roll their eyes to the ceiling when they hear about teaching a science class with a lab online, because of all the really obvious challenges to that. So I think that synchronous sessions in this particular class, Geography 105 or Physical Geography, is critical. It's absolutely necessary. And so I'm so glad the course developer has them in there every week. So I teach the course pretty much as it's already been developed, but I've been actually elaborating on the chats much more than I think he originally intended, and I'm just really having fun with it because I see the tremendous benefits The third kind of more general thing is my experience having designed and taught an accelerated hybrid course at the University of Wisconsin colleges. We were faced with having to break down the course content into what had to be done during our very precious one night a week together versus what we could cut the students loose with on their own. And I found that one nightly class meeting face-to-face was very, very, very critical for sort of giving the introduction to the unit, during which there's a lot of questioning and interaction. It isn't just a straight textual, outline, and to really get the big ideas and the framework across. So that's very, very invaluable. During that kind of discussion, you can also identify misconceptions that students have about certain things, and maybe, introduce visuals and things that really stimulate and engage. So I find the introduction to a unit is something that I personally really think has to be done synchronously. Otherwise, it's that kind of one-way lead balloon thing, that I just don't think works, or at least doesn't for me. The other thing is that you have the capability to prod students to think and answer questions as you would in an in-class situation, which just does not happen. Otherwise, you can email a student or post something on a discussion board and they can just ignore you. And yet when you're in a chat situation, I'll have a student say in answer to a question I may ask, like, look at a set of data or look at a map, and they just kind of, quote, shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know, and I just keep bugging them until they come up with an observation. And that's a very, very, very critical thing, because I think it has much greater value for them to discover things, for them to start seeing patterns on maps or in data, than me saying, oh, here's this pattern on the map. I mean, it just doesn't work unless they discover it on their own, and sometimes they need that little bit of prodding. So those are a lot of the reasons why I value these kind of sessions so much.
I think that's fantastic. I heard a lot of good stuff. Kendra, you wanted to interject a little something at this point too, I think.
Well, what I appreciate is being a GXP 105 is kind of your entry-level introductory type course here at CMU. So you're really setting the stage for remaining coursework for the students. So the sooner you can engage the students in the environment, you're kind of setting that example for them to go into other courses. And while other courses don't necessarily require it, hopefully their positive experience with you and learning from that positive experience can help prompt them to maybe prompt other instructors, or even if it's not required.
Well, what you
find, we find that a lot of students want that interaction and engagement with the instructor. So thank you for what you do.
Todd says that you're on your Kendra.
Thank you very, very much, Kendra. Thank you. May I ask, I'm still having a little trouble with my audio. I apologize. So you sounded kind of muffled. Did you ask me a question? I think I heard pretty much everything you said, but I didn't miss a question.
No, not yet. In fact, a couple others have said Kendra sounds muffled. That's how she sounds in real life. I don't know what to tell you.
But I did hear what you said, though, and I thank you very much for it, because I do take special interest in these 100-level classes and the very critical role they could play as a pipeline into more advanced courses, or even to changes in majors. So I really appreciate your mentioning that a lot. Thank you.
And I know that you struggled with some of the students to get their involvement, to get them involved.
No, well, I'm fiddling with the microphone a little bit because Todd says I'm coming through a little bit garbled as well. We've got a good connection, and I'll try to make sure I spend some extra time with this recording and clean it up. But we've gotten that feedback from a couple people on other shows. I wonder if our microphone, this wonderful mic we have, if it's wearing out. It's a few years old. But one thing I wanted to touch on, two things in fact. I love that it's at least in part about Amy's own personality and the joy she feels in connecting in real time with students. I think that's a wonderful element here that I don't want that to fall out of focus. Now the second thing is only that, and you've got a visual that supports this better than I could, Kendra, but what we're showing, and it won't be part of the audio, so I'll describe it a bit, it's essentially a Venn diagram that shows this key intersection where the meaningful engagement occurs. And yes, it's relevant to the content. We're involving the student and the teacher, but that there's a real relationship that forms around the development of expertise and the relevance of the discussion. And that's where that other piece fits that Amy was describing. Everyone knows something about this, and the opportunity to prompt and engage in real time and help students scaffold from what they know and what they can figure out to what they need to know and what they need to figure out. So I'm going to move on now, and I do have a second question for you, Amy, unless there was anything else you wanted to add, Kendra. I know you've had a hard go of it, getting the students to buy into this, but I wonder, can you be specific about what challenges you faced in encouraging students to take part in these scheduled interactions?
Well, thanks so much. I think one big question I guess I have had for several years, and I'm still not really sure what the answer to it is. Maybe some of our attendees today could help. It's my understanding that you cannot require a synchronous session, so that you have to either be covering material that's not that critical, or that you have to have an archived session as backup that students can go into if they cannot attend the session. Do you know what the status is on that, Jeremy? Are there instructors on campus that do require synchronous sessions and that everyone has to be at the same time on one night, for example?
I'm aware of a few different models, and Kendra will probably want to speak to this too. We do have some courses and programs where these synchronous kinds of meetings are essentially required for all intents and purposes. In those particular cases, we still see faculty allowing flexible alternatives. So whether that becomes a verification that the student actually listened to the recording and is able to engage in some sort of offline discussion or write a summary of what transpired, what I see a lot of is the replacement for actual attendance usually is somehow a little more arduous, I think, than actually attending and taking part. Kendra, what do you want to add to that?
No, you're simply saying exactly what I was going to say, that it's being understanding of who your students are and putting it out there that it's a requirement, but being flexible enough to understand, that you may literally have students overseas or on the West Coast or working nights or, whatever the case may be. So being able to provide options for them when they really cannot be there at the exact same time.
Well, because students, they won't all see the value in it on their own. That's a tricky part, I think, here too. What else do you want to say on this subject, Amy? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no problem. I think you guys just touched upon, something very, very important there is if there are things that conflict, you need to be able to accommodate, because the students come into these courses with a perception that they're extremely flexible, and they get almost resentful at the thought that they have to be somewhere at a specific time, and I think it's because of the context and their perception of the course as a whole. For example, them being in different time zones or having work conflicts. But what I have found very interesting is that even though in the introductory discussion board post, they are asked a question explicitly, what night works for you, what times work for you, and most of them did indicate that Wednesday night at 8 o'clock would work. Only about 6 students are showing up out of a total of about, 20, 25 in the course. And so this is something that just continues to puzzle me, because I feel, quite frankly, hampered in how much I can do with chats unless I know I can require them or not, because the archives, as we just discovered in conversation recently, the students can have a way of going into the archive and coming out, and there's no way of my proving that they really went through them. So the idea of a little bit more rigorous requirement sounds very appealing to me. I'm going to keep that in mind. But just real quickly, The other couple issues I've had are students sometimes sign in, but they're actually not there. So they're sort of working around the system, so to speak. They'll log into the session and they'll go somewhere else. So I now routinely call on students and ask them to answer questions. And if someone does not answer a question and then a second time also doesn't answer a question, I just give them 0 points. And I've been at odds with a couple of students about this. They're like, oh, Haruf, you're saying I wasn't there? And I'm like, yeah, I'm saying you weren't there. I have no way of knowing except that you didn't answer 2 questions in a row. So it can get a little dicey sometimes.
Well, I want to point out a couple of things we've had come in over the chat. Also, that I think some of what you're saying is a good translation of this particular visual. I mean, I think you have some students who are complying. They're complying in the fact that they're showing up, air quotes, but they're not really engaging. Dr. Grieser has shared that he has his chat at a certain time each week, points for showing up, but they have to write a 2-page summary for credit of the archive if they are unable to attend. You know, for me, I would probably reevaluate my schedule if I knew I had to come up with a 2-page summary versus simply attending. Todd's doing something similar.
Right.
Tammy is looking at being flexible about when the sessions occur and letting people make room for life to happen. I'm wondering, this wasn't in our script for today, Amy, but you said about 6 students tend to join in. Are you finding it's the same 6 or a different mix each time?
It's a slightly different mix, but it's generally the same core, which I think is a very, very positive sign. It suggests that those students are seeing and are convinced of the benefit, because what I'm doing is I'm not only presenting the big picture for that particular unit, but I'm also giving them help to complete their labs. So one of the students replied that she was able to go directly to her labs and felt much more confident about how to do them because she had that kind of big picture context. And other students have remarked that if they had to miss them for one reason, they really missed them and they felt really bad. And in my evaluations from the summer, when I really started working on using the chats to be kind of more of a central tool for the course, the overwhelming response of all the students was their favorite part of the class was the chat. So, you know, it's kind of like, well, let's just get them in there once and convince them, and then hopefully maybe attendance will
I think that's good proof of concept. Certainly, that those who are taking part, it gets mentioned. They're enjoying it, they're returning, they're seeing that they can get access to you and get information from you that isn't readily available, at least not in the same sort of format elsewhere. I've seen some good stuff come in from our audience on the chat, too, that points equals attendance. That if you can throw some points to the students, they tend to show up in greater numbers. We saw a suggestion of, actually, this is something I think you and I discussed ahead of the show, too, Amy, that giving a pre and a post quiz, or just a post quiz, where you can answer those questions correctly, yes, and she's going to have done so by virtue of being part of that chat session. I think we have to help the students see their way to the value of taking part, to the value of the collaboration, being part of the community. If points are the convincing factor, then I guess that's what we do. And if it's not points for coming to the session itself, then maybe the points come from performing well on the short quiz that follows up the session, or the points come from offering the 2-page summary, or wherever they come from. But if points are the answer, then get points. I think where you're coming from with the notion of prescribed content isn't lost on any of us either. And I'm going to put Kendra on the spot a little bit here, and I think she'll play along with me. Amy gets a pre-designed course. I get a pre-designed course. It has the grading schema already laid out. So let's say, hypothetically, it makes no provision for the kinds of points we're talking about. What can we do? What's okay? Are you thinking, is this the sort of thing you want to touch on in a different week? I don't want to put you unfairly on the spot.
If you're adding points, then I would say a minimal number of points. points. If you're not replacing the equivalent of an exam grade by adding critical participation points for attendance tests, then you're okay. You're adding value to the course.
We're not eroding something else.
Correct.
That's okay.
Correct.
Tammy actually popped up and said, what about introducing digital badges? That wouldn't impact grading at all necessarily. It would be a different testing.
Well, but it would be adding a value to the students. What does the badge mean for them?
Right. What can I do with this thing? Yeah. And I think Todd shared his model of scheduling 7, requiring 4.
Yeah.
I think that ties in nicely with Tammy's suggestion of making sure we leave room for life to happen. Are there incentives that you've used, Amy, that you've not shared with us yet, but you found that have worked, or maybe some that you'd say, hey, look, I've done that and it didn't work? Anything you want to add there?
I'm sorry, Jeremy. Can you please repeat that, hon? I'm just having a little trouble here. I had a lot of trouble hearing Kendra, unfortunately, but I'm having trouble hearing you now, too. That's okay. As I said, it might be at my end. I'm not sure, but if you could repeat, I'd really appreciate it. I'm sorry.
Happy to repeat it. I'm wondering what sorts of incentives you've tried that you would advise others to consider, or maybe advisors not to consider. Since we're talking about offering points, our audio is apparently really bad today. I don't know. Just going to have to wait. Do the best we can. Only have to endure for about 6 more minutes. What kinds of incentives do you use, Amy?
The big thing, like you mentioned, is actually what you call like a post-chat quiz, which I'm a little bit hampered in my ability to add new assessments in the course. I'm just actually going into the week's assessment that exists and exchanging out some of the questions I think are weaker with questions that are from the chat. So I have noticed an increased visiting to the archives of students after they see the test questions. So that's indicating that's working well to give them an incentive. The other things I've tried is giving extra credit questions beforehand that if they answer them at the beginning of the session, they can get extra credit. But I've had a couple of students at first, when I wasn't that clear about what the requirements were, they would just email me a link to a website and say, here's my answer, or they would copy and paste in something that obviously wasn't their words in an email. So I finally just broke down a few weeks ago. I said, I'm sorry, you can't get extra credit for pre-chat questions unless you actually attend the chat, live chat. So that's got that squared away, but of course, again, it's just that struggle to get them to really understand things and not just try to, squeeze between the cracks, so to speak. But I would think there would be more interest in extra credit when my chats run longer than expected, which a couple of them have recently. I actually give extra credit points so that the students that have been attending and have said that they really appreciate that they can get extra points because the chat went longer.
I think that's fantastic, Amy. And while you were sharing that answer, Kendra and I did a little exploring, and this is entirely on me. I have a microphone that's native to my laptop. It's junk, as you've all witnessed today. And I have a microphone that we normally use for the show, which was plugged in, but not in Kendra's lovely mix. What is it? People really like it when I make a mistake, especially a technical mistake, I'm finding. But we've connected our good microphone now. And I will say,
sounds much better.
For what it's worth,
just a little slow.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm relieved to know that everything you've shared with the audience today, Amy, came through clearly, because that's what really today was about. Tammy, you have your hand up. Is there something you'd like to add?
I just had a question that I thought might be easier to ask than to try to type it out. I'm very appreciative of what Amy is sharing with some of these ideas. And I don't want to come across sounding negative with this question, but I'm just wondering if she let the students know in advance that she was trying out some of this new technology, Because one of the things I guess I have found, and I try to hold on to, is changing content in the midst of a course as far as what's worth extra credit, what's not, as opposed to having that predefined at the beginning. Just helps keep that clarity and that consistency in the class. But if they know in advance that they are in this kind of trial method with Amy as far as figuring out how to use the system, they're aware of that, what's going on. Just wondering what her feelings are, thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm sorry, I'm not totally sure I understood your question, so please let me restate. I'm not sure. You're saying that instead of sticking with the pre-designed course content, that you tell them that you will, on occasion, change it to some degree throughout the semester, so that kind of keeps them on their heels? Is that
not necessarily that direction, as much as if students know in advance what to expect, what is worth extra credit, what potentials to send you information, if they should attend, if they should not attend. If all of that is known at the start of the class, as opposed to having flexibility and changing what you're expecting or what may be available for extra credit, I guess I'm just finding a lot of support in some recent research that I've been reading, very enjoyable research, that the key is staying consistent. Unless the student knows in advance that this course, this one you're running maybe right now, is an experimental class trying out this new system with Collaborate and doing synchronous teaching, etc.
Thanks so much. Yes, if I do understand you correctly, I do to some degree share that with them. Hi, Stephanie. I see Stephanie was here with us, but I believe she's left. Stephanie Bechtel took 105 with me last year. And I'm pretty transparent about the fact that, one, I think chats are extremely important, and that I want them to attend the live chats, even though going to the archives are worth the same number of points. And so I am communicating with them almost in I wonder if it's too direct a way, that it is a bit experimental, that I'm working with a foundation of a course that was designed by somebody else, and I'm trying something new. And so I think sometimes they enjoy knowing that they're part of an experiment, but I agree with you about the consistency, that things need to be laid out very clearly at the start, and that you should, veer off course mid-semester as sparingly as possible. Am I understanding you correctly there?
Yep, that's exactly what I was getting to. Sorry, it wasn't so clear. And again, I agree with you. I think students kind of like to be a part of experiments as long as they know they are such. I would hate being a student and find I'm being a part of somebody's experiment and just didn't know that in advance. I think they're more than willing to work with us if they know.
Yes. I absolutely agree with you. I have been a little bit transparent, I don't know if I should be, about the fact that the course was developed by somebody else, not me, and that I'm using the chats to emphasize the big ideas, but also kind of infuse my own personality and my own spin on it, so that they may sense a little bit of what I call a duality. And I just don't want that duality to become so strong that they get confused and they don't see enough overlap and continuity between my content in the chats and the content that's in the existing materials, that they feel it's just a little bit too much to tolerate. So that's been a little bit of the struggle I've been dealing with. Because when I tell them that most people who are hired to teach online at CMU are teaching a course that was developed or designed by somebody else, they're often very surprised to hear that.
Okay, on that note, I want to thank everybody for an absolutely spectacular discussion. There's still some things coming in on the chat. Amy, it was wonderful to have you here with us today. We're actually about 2 minutes over, so no, it's quite all right. You did a wonderful job for us, and I think the evidence is in the level of interaction that we've had. I do want to apologize for the technical challenges. That's entirely on me. Next week, I'll doubly check that we're using the right microphone. Thanks to those of you who pointed out what a mess the audio was so that we kept digging. the last thing we need to share, Todd, I'll give you 100% of your admission price back as a refund. I think that's totally reasonable. Just remember, everyone, keep calm and aim for the meaty part of the curve. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so